Thank you guys for being here. Again, as Nick said, my name is CJ. I work for Compass IT Compliance, and I head up our virtual CISO practice. Been at Compass for, wow, time flies, over 4 years now. They pulled me out of, well, I guess, coerced me into retiring from the United States Coast Guard. I had spent 21 years in the Coast Guard doing cybersecurity for about the last 18 years of that IT and then cybersecurity. Was lucky enough to see a lot of things, work in different parts of the country, even as far east as Bahrain. So in doing that, really managed cybersecurity for a lot of different units, for a lot of different parts of the country, for a lot of different users, up to 50,000 users. So again, it was really a good experience for me. Coming over to the private sector and getting to where, now working as a virtual CISO for a lot of different companies, it's been fun and getting to see a lot of different things and work with companies and help them mature in a lot of different ways. As we're going to talk about today, SOC 2, obviously something that has become a very popular term throughout our industry, a very popular audit and reporting type mechanism that a lot of companies are using. And I think it's for in a variety of different ways. As a CISO for a lot of companies, it's giving your opinion, at the executive level is how we progress, what's best for our company. And again, security has become such a vital piece of operations, as well as a way to keep the company moving forward from a business standpoint, answering questionnaire after questionnaire after questionnaire after questionnaire. It just comes in at all times, in many different ways. And without satisfying these questionnaires, business can slow down. I did a vendor management one of these before and talk about doing vendor risk. And we talk about, well, if a vendor doesn't have a good security program, are they high risk? Sure, but we're not going with them because they don't have a security program in place, or they can't attest to having a security program in place. We're going to rate a vendor high risk because of the criticality they are to our operations. If they don't have a security program, you're just not going to be our vendor. That's a piece of cake. A lot of the questionnaires that we answer now end up, being something that helps drive business, as I said. And when we have a SOC 2, it's a way of helping to satisfy those questions we're going to be answered. And we're going to be asked. So SOC 2 compliance, having a SOC 2 report, works in many different ways. It speaks to the maturity of our security program. It's going to also speak to, I look at it as from a marketing standpoint. I'm doing a lot of these as we select a vendor, doing one this week alone for a backup solution. We were looking at two. One had a SOC 2, one did not. We chose the one with the SOC 2. It's something we're easily able to download, get from them, a lot of times sign an NDA, and see the controls they have in place. So again, SOC 2 has also become an easy way of marketing what we do. So again, as we kind of get started, I'll bounce around with some of these things, but at a high level, looking at a SOC 2, it is a compliance standard for service organizations. And what we're talking about here is service organizational controls. We're not just talking about just IT controls. We're talking about all controls. So we talk about, from a high level, when we onboard an employee, that executive level control from employee handbook and making sure they get background checks. And again, we'll see some of the objectives as we go through this. But it's the holistic view of the organization, that there's that internal control within the entire organization. So, when you're doing the SOC 2, and you're going through this, and we'll go through what the process looks like if you've never done one. Again, I would venture to guess that a lot of you on this call have been through a SOC 2 before, whether it's with your company or helping somebody else. I mean, a lot of you are probably auditors and are familiar with the framework and the objectives that come with this. But again, when we start looking at this, there's 5 major trust services criteria. There's security, there's availability, there's processing integrity, there's confidentiality, and there's privacy, as you see on the screen here. Security is the one that is required. And again, we'll see this in a couple different places throughout the presentation. Security is the one that is required at all times. And when we look at those objectives, there's 9 different sections in there. I believe there's 64 different objectives that we will meet within security. Availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy are all ones that would be add-ons. So depending on what you are looking to have audited, looking to showcase, or based on what your customers use your service for. So as you see here, security is something that is required. Anytime you do a SOC 2 audit, you will have to do security. Availability, again, if you have customers have concerns with downtime or your uptime is really a big piece of your service offering, availability would be something that you want to be looking at. Now, again, we're going to look at this from 2 sides. I would say multiple sides. Doing a SOC 2 yourself, getting ready for one, but also touching on when you're reviewing somebody else's SOC report. So think about from the vendor side. If you're doing a vendor review, when you look at someone else's SOC 2, do you care about their uptime? So maybe paying attention to make sure they did availability and they have disaster recovery, business continuity planning in place. Data backup is would be a big piece there. Another one would be confidentiality, another one of those trust services. Again, if you're storing sensitive information, something's protected by an NDA, you would want to make sure that you're doing confidentiality in doing this, doing your SOC 2. Processing integrity is another one. If you're doing some automatic financial data processing on your systems, then that would be something that would be included in your SOC 2. And then privacy, if you're storing customer PII or PHI. Again, a lot of different options in here. When you sign with an auditor to complete this, so it's a CPA, then your security one is the basic, the one that's a one size fits all. You're always going to be doing the add-ons. Are availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. I've seen privacy be more expensive for an add-on than the others, but again, they all have a little bit of an add-on when you keep going through it. So some of the benefits as we get our SOC 2 report is, again, number one is having an improved security posture. Going through these audits and having these controls in place really does wonders for improving that security posture. And to get that security posture, it's going to take an entire organization, as we talked about. So getting that culture, getting that buy-in from everybody at the company is huge. And that's going to really speak to the security posture, but getting that culture, getting everybody going and moving in the same direction from a security standpoint. Competitive advantage, as I talked about. So when I'm comparing apples to apples, what sets them apart, right? Which is the one that I want to go with? If they have a SOC 2, that can be a competitive advantage for your company in terms of getting selected by certain companies to work with your service, with your offering. Reputation. We keep getting clean report after report after report. That's going to speak very highly to what your reputation is, and will really help us in moving forward with more customers with that different brand. So talking about the operating effectiveness of these controls. So as we design our controls, as we design our program, we're going to be looking at how do they operate. So when we design something, think about that cybersecurity model. When we talk about things being non-existent from a control standpoint, to being ad hoc, to being repeatable, having a defined process, having a managed process, or having it be optimized. When we start designing these controls, we want them to be at least repeatable. We want to make sure that we can do these things over and over and over and over. And then we also want them to be able to become defined and managed. And that's how we're going to continue to mature as we start doing these controls year after year after year and really maturing our program. And again, it's also going to give you that executive oversight, because when you see these controls, you see how we build these things out. We're looking at that top-down approach, that executive overview. Everybody's buying in from the executive level all the way down to the last employee that's been hired. So really getting that whole process under wraps. So where do I start? I think that's really kind of where we come into with SOC 2. And again, we've talked about a few of these things already. And when you look at this list here, not to go into each one line by line, but I think the thing that stands out with these is this is kind of the meat and potatoes, of a security program. So having that organizational oversight from the policy standpoint, from the code of conduct and the internal controls. Think about when you onboarded with your company. I know when I onboarded with mine, first thing I did was have to go through a background check, and I had to review the employee handbook and sign the code of conduct and sign an NDA, and doing these things as an employee. Those things are paramount to getting started with your SOC 2, and making sure that from that early on, from the time we onboard, whether it's an employee or a vendor, that we have the control over these entities from the very start. Policies provide that oversight, provide that governance. The additional items in the code of conduct and the NDA, again, starting there is huge. When we say, where do we start? And I think the first thing is taking a step back and looking at our program. Do we have a security program? Is there a security program in place that we can lean on as we're starting to go write our controls and design our program? You can have a design, you can have a security program in place. What's it mapped to? Is it mapped to, do you fall under NIST? Do you fall under ISO 27001? What does the design of your program look like? Maybe it's ad hoc. Maybe it's, hey, we're just doing the best we can right now. We have to get some kind of control over all these facets of our security program. So again, where do I start? There's not a black and white answer, in my opinion. These are all things you're going to have when you're going through your SOC 2, when you're designing your SOC 2, and then when you verify those controls are actually operating period after period after period, time over time. So when we talk about this, again, this has been something that's been very confusing, and I know I was confused when I first, in the military, we never did SOC reports. So something that was new to me coming out of the service, getting into the private sector, and something that as I've explained it at a high level, even when I was trying to learn it, it was SOC 2 type 1, SOC 2 type 2. It got to be confusing. Now it's not confusing, and like to some of you, it's not confusing, but it's been lost in translation when trying to explain it. So we'll see if I can do a good job here for anybody who does not know. So a SOC 2 type 1 is really your design phase. This is a point in time. So today is May 11th, 2022 at 1:16 p.m. So that is a point in time. That is, at this day, at this time, our program was designed properly. So our controls were in place and designed and attested by an auditor on this date. That's your point in time. That's your design. It's honestly an open book test. I've been part of these where the auditors told you that if we have a May 11th timeframe point in time, and on that date you're not ready, we'll push it back. We'll push it back a week. We'll push it back a day. We'll push it back a month. Whatever the case may be. But you will not find yourself failing a SOC 2 type 1 audit. It'll be more of a review of the design of your program. Think of it as an ISO 27001 policy and procedure drill in some way, but they will look at the operating effectiveness of some of those controls. Some that fit into a cadence, some that need to have an operating effectiveness to them. When you move over to your SOC 2 type 2, this is really going to be the part where it's truly an audit. And we're going to test over a period of time how that control operates. So for example, if you're doing a 12-month period, so we're going to go May 1st, 2022 until April 30th, 2023, that's going to be your 1 year. All these controls have to operate for that entire period. So if you have a case where, let's just say you onboarded 50 people and there's a new hire package for 50 people that need to be completed, an auditor will ask you for a sample, a list of people who were onboarded during this time. You'll send them 50 people. They'll ask for a sample. So they'll give you the 4 names, 5, maybe 10%. They'll ask you for 5 names that were onboarded during that time. They're going to want to see their onboarding package. Did they all complete security awareness training? Did they all sign the code of conduct? Did they all sign the NDA? Have they all reviewed the employee handbook? Whatever that process is for you, they're going to validate that. Did that control operate? If you go 5 for 5, they may not ask for any more. Excuse me. I've seen some of these where you can get an exception. Exception is basically you have a finding equivalent to a finding in an audit, where they'll say, well, of 25 that were reviewed, 2 employees were not onboarded properly. Doesn't mean you fail the audit. You have an exception, and they'll note that. But that's where the control has to operate for the entire year, in a myriad of different control areas that we'll touch on. So again, it's the full period of time, not an open book test. We can't adjust that time. Once we start with the controls, and once we start with that period of time, we're locked in for that period. So again, truly an audit, and we got to make sure all of our ducks are in a row when we start doing this. The design becomes very important. If during the type 1, if we don't properly design our program, then it can't operate effectively. We've come in and done some of these where we've designed it from a type 1 standpoint, and we set it up to be repeatable. We don't know if they're going to need our help moving forward, but they have to be able to sustain it as they go. So we design these to be repeatable so that these controls can repeat time after time, after quarter after quarter, month after month, year after year. They continue to keep going. I've seen some companies come in and go right to a type 2. I don't recommend it from an operating standpoint. You haven't gone through the test where your design can pass. Your design could have flaws in it. Your security program could have holes where you're not seeing certain things, or certain things aren't captured. The type 1 will really give you that really first test that says, yes, you're good. Your design, you're properly designed, and these can operate. And we go to the type 2, and now we've proved it because our design worked. Type 2s, straight to a type 2, you don't have that open book test to rely on. You don't have those results to rely on. You're truly kind of, I say, playing with fire. So I don't recommend it. Companies will do it to save money. I don't think you're saving money, because you still have to do a SOC report year after year. Most of your clients aren't going to be happy with this. Oh, I did one 5 years ago. They're going to want to see that you did one year after year after year. So I don't see it as throwing money away by doing a type 1 first. I see it as you probably saving money, knowing that you've designed it properly and you're not going to have any gaps or potentially fail it in the future. So we go back to the design. So we talk about, so I should probably reverse these. So we got control design and you got program design. So again, when I say, do you have a program that's designed? You might say, well, maybe, but it's not documented. Maybe, but it's not that formal. It's kind of, I would call it ad hoc, or it's just, I think we got everything. I'm not totally sure. What framework, do you rely on? Is it NIST? Is it ISO? Is it HIPAA? Again, do you know that? It's fine if you don't. No wrong answers when we approach this. When we go back to slide 6, if I go back a few, see how fast I can do this. So coming back here, we start looking at these different items. We're going to write controls. We write our own controls. We're not following a framework like a NIST, like I've mentioned a few times, where there's specific, you must do this, you shall do this, you shall do this. We're going to write controls to line up with different objectives. This is how we do risk assessment. This is how we handle risk management. We're going to showcase it. There's no one size fits all when it comes to SOC. We're going to explain how we do things. And does that meet the SOC objective? When you're writing your controls, and if you have somebody like, for example, when we help write controls, we write controls that align with the SOC objectives. And if you're in a certain section, then, for example, if I'm an incident response, I don't just write one control that talks about incident response. I can write many controls. Talk about having a risk response policy as a control. We have a risk response, an incident response plan that we review annually and that we test against. That we have incident response procedures. So we have escalation points and different alerts that come in for incident response. So we can have 5, 6, 7 controls that we write that align to incident response. So we're not just writing one control that says we just have policy. We're really getting to showcase all the things that we do have as it relates to something like incident response.
CJ, mind if I interrupt you to pose a few questions?
Absolutely.
And sorry for the folks that asked these questions. I was catching up on my email inbox, so I might have missed these questions by a few minutes here. But the first one is, when conducting an IT risk assessment, would you weigh the SOC 2 Type 2 and ISO 27001 equally? If not, why? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually one that I was just working with another company on recently. So the decision we made with working with this company is this company was more global. So we found that ISO 27001 played better from a global standpoint, more globally recognized. SOC 2 seems to be something that's just here in the United States. I do put them to be very comparable. I think when you think about a questionnaire, so let's think about as we see questionnaires and people and these things coming in, it's using the same question. I'm sure this person asking the question is seeing it the same way. Do you have an ISO 27001 ISO certification, or are you SOC 2 compliant, or do you have a SOC 2 report? So I think they are very comparable. I think it would be, in that case, what works better for you. ISO, if you do go through an ISO risk assessment, so that's a third-party attestation, not really, I would say, ISO certified. It's definitely not ISO certified. It's a step in the process to getting ISO certified. So in this case, what would be better, being having an ISO risk assessment or a SOC report? SOC report seems to be something that's playing better in the industry right now. So I would probably say it's very close. It's 50, I would say it's 50-50, but I would probably go the SOC side now, just on personal experience and just what I'm seeing people asking for in their security questionnaires and what they want to see for attestation.
Thank you. And another question for you. Take a company with over 28,000 employees that is globally situated. How is the sample size determined?
So another great question, and going through that right now with a company that is 35,000 people and is global, and it's very hard. We just did a 3-month observation period, and they had onboarded over 4,000 employees. So we are going through that audit part, the type 2 audit part now. We've already passed the observation period. And what they've asked for is they asked for a list of every single employee that was onboarded. They asked for the parameters. The auditors asked for the parameters of how they requested this information. And what they're going to do now is they're going to then ask us for a sample of employees. Out of the 4,000, I mean, usually I see 10%. Are they going to ask for 400? I hope not. But again, the sample size can be potentially very large. Reviewing reports, for example, AWS, review AWS SOC report probably a couple times a year for a few different companies. And again, another company that's onboarding a lot of people throughout the year. So again, sample size can be quite large. Usually even in the AWS one, for example, is you'll see that they sampled a large number of tickets to verify that things were there, that certain controls were there. So that sample size can be quite large. If you give me a couple weeks, I probably know better coming out of it with this one with 35,000 people, 35,000 employees. But that sample size can be quite large, which again, it touches back to where we started. This is a full organizational drill. So we're going to be relying on HR to pull that information and hoping that HR did their part here. It's not just an IT, it's not just a security drill. It's making sure that everybody does their part. So again, can be where that communication kind of comes in, so we know what to expect as we're going forward. Hope that answers your question. So where I was here, so as we talk about the control design, again, having your program designed, as we tie that back to control design and how we start writing those controls, and as we spoke, we can have multiple controls written to satisfy an objective, and we'll get to what some of those objectives are, as examples. But again, anything you want, it's where I say too, there's two sides, making sure that we can we pass an audit, right? So we write controls that we are actually doing, that we can do, that we should do, right? Thinking about security being paramount here, and maybe an audit being secondary, but the audit becomes easy when we do these things from a security function. If we can do all these items listed, then the audit becomes easy. And we'll see, different ways of tracking that as we continue on throughout this. But designing those controls to align with those objectives, to align with what should be in place from a security perspective, huge. And again, it's really a blank slate, and you get to write your own controls with how you do things. The other piece is before we get even to the controls, is going to be that system description, which is commonly known as the section 3. This includes that companies and services overview, the service commitments, the system requirements, the infrastructure, system, software, people, data. A lot of things that end up that are in this section here. And this is where I always go back and forth between this being an audit, but as well as kind of a marketing tool, right? How awesome is my company? How awesome is our team, the people, the system that we've built, the infrastructure that we have and that we maintain and that we invest in, the requirements that our system has to show really how robust it is, how great the service offering we have in our service commitments, really showcasing some of that here for when these reports get reviewed. And again, if you're comparing company A to company B, this could be one of those things that really sets you apart. In a lot of ways, you may not have FaceTime with somebody who's going to review your SOC report and measure you before they want to come see about it in purchasing your product or your service. So really using this report as just an awesome tool from marketing, right? Nick, you're a marketing guy. From a marketing standpoint, to have all this information about how great you are in this one section that someone's gonna read and review is, I think, a great way to look at this. Yes, it's an audit, but also a great way to showcase your company.
Now, I can say from my standpoint too, just evaluating some of the marketing platforms that we've used on our end, the presence of a SOC 2 report that our security team can review prior to signing on has been crucial.
Yeah, huge. And again, this is from a phenomenal marketing guy in Nick. So again, having that section 3 really help outline what you have. Within that section 3, there's also, I guess it's section 4, but there's a control environment section. And this is where the first place you're going to start to see your controls. So when you start thinking about, and again, it's maybe sometimes hard to paint this picture in this environment, but when you think about the controls that you write, are going to be something that's covered in your system description in your control environment section. So we're going to speak about all these items that we go back a few slides so everybody can see them. When we talk about our controls, they're going to be in these categories here. You're going to have these same exact sections in your system description under your control environment, and those specific sections. So when you think about, again, we'll go back to incident response, for example, that's going to speak to what you do from an incident response standpoint. A lot of those controls that you're going to be writing for you to meet the objectives are going to also be in that system description in that control environment. They're also going to align to your policy. So when an auditor comes in and looks, they're going to see your control environment. They're going to see the control that you wrote. They're going to see that it's in the system description and under the control environment, and that you have policy that aligns with exactly what is in this control. And again, hopefully, the policy should be saying the same thing that's in your system description and the same thing that's in your control environment. And then that last piece is going to be the operating effectiveness of it. Does it operate? You can say you do it till you're blue in the face. Anybody who's been through an audit or gone through the questionnaire process or had to validate that you're doing something. Yeah, great. I got policy. That's awesome. That's an administrative control. Show me the technical control. Show me what you're doing to this actually operates. And that's going to be how this whole thing kind of pieces together. So we say we're doing this. Our policy supports that we're doing this, and now here's the evidence that shows that we are doing this. Here's where we are logging people's logins. We have password criteria. We have group policy that pushes out that blocks things, that enforces policy. We have a firewall that's blocking certain traffic. We have a VPN that requires MFA. Where's the evidence that this operates properly? So that's where it's going to all tie back together. And again, you're going to have these controls. So you're going to write different controls under the common criteria, which is security. If you're doing confidentiality, processing integrity, availability, or privacy, you're going to be doing all these different controls under each one of these trust services criteria. So again, can be a lot of controls. You can also see repeat controls. Because when you have certain objectives, you may have the same control that satisfies multiple objectives. So you'll go through and you'll see where you have one control that is in 6, 7, 8 different places. And I'll give a shameless plug to a company that I do a lot of these. They're the auditor on a lot of these SOC readinesses that I do, working with companies, and it's IS partners, and they use a tool called Field Guide, which I've fallen in love with. I used to have to, when I would work in certain audit firms that I work with, that I have to do this, is if I have to provide evidence for a control, and that control is in 7 or 8 different places, I have to provide evidence 7 or 8 different times, or the organization has to provide evidence 7 or 8 different times, which is, as anybody who's had to do it, can be a nightmare, just a time suck. This field guide that they use maps the controls to one request area. So once I upload one piece of evidence, it maps it to all 8 areas where it is. So it's really been nice to use, and has been a time saver. And again, I'm a big try to stay as organized as humanly possible, and using a tool like this really helps us stay organized. So here's some examples of some of the objectives that you're going to see, and like I said, there's a lot of these. And when you see the CC here, I don't know if I have a coloring tool here, but maybe I do. See if I can use this.
CJ, you mind if I interrupt you before you dive into this slide? Quick question for you.
Yeah.
Let me just figure out how to word this question here. Well, so the question is, why organization can achieve certification to ISO 27001, but not ISO 27002? Is it necessary for SOC 3 report for that org?
For SOC 3 report. So SOC 3 report is a summary of your SOC 2. So SOC 3, when an auditor does so if you go through a SOC 2, you get your SOC 2 report, you can pay for a SOC 3, which is basically a summary of your SOC 2, and people make that more publicly available for download on their websites. So I guess, Nick, if you can repeat the question. So
yeah, I'm going to, the wording was a little tricky, but it's why org can achieve certification to ISO 27001, but not ISO 27002, question mark. Is it necessary for SOC 3 report for that org?
So I guess I don't really have an answer. I guess I don't really have an answer. I'm not really sure I understand the question totally.
Yeah, totally understandable. If for the person who posted that question, if you want to try maybe just rewording that a little bit, we might be able to give you a more accurate answer.
So we talk about these SOC objectives, and I won't try to get the highlighter. I'll just kind of circle here. So you see CC 1.5. That's going to be an objective, right? There's going to be a CC 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. And this is the language that's going to be in that objective. So for example, the entity holds individuals accountable for their internal control responsibilities in the pursuit of objectives. So really the controls that I would write for this normally would be around the code of conduct, business ethics, the employee handbook, acknowledging that, having an NDA in place, things that are gonna help us ensure our employees comply with our internal control. So again, when we see a control like that, we can write multiple controls. A 1.5.1, 1.5.2, 1.5.3. So you get to write multiple controls that show that we do that. One of the things we also like to put up there is that we have these things in a public location. So an auditor is going to come back and say, show us where you post these things publicly, so that employees can see them at all times. Should they need to review a policy, what the code of conduct actually is. Last thing you want is sign the code of conduct because you want the job, and then later on, as we kind of go through, and I don't remember what was in that, so you want to go back and kind of check yourself in certain ways. So again, as we look through some of these, you'll see your 2.2, you get your 4.2. These are all different areas. And again, I don't want to go through and read all these. I know this is goes against any presentation or having a busy slide, but I wanted to just kind of give you an idea of what some of these objectives look like if you have not seen them. You'll also see here, so the CC is your common criteria. Again, this is the one that has about 64 60-ish different objectives to meet. Then you're going to get into your P1.1. This is privacy, right? So this is going to be a privacy control. If the entity provides notice to data subjects about its privacy practices to meet the entity's objectives related to privacy. So again, we would write controls that align with this privacy objective. Your C here is confidentiality. So talking about the confidentiality objectives, they're going to be in there. This is actually a relatively small section. I think there's only 2 controls, objectives under confidentiality. It's this one, and then one that talks about data destruction as we try to protect data. So again, a small area to write controls on. And then you have your A, which is availability. So again, as we talk about the ability to have our information, their data systems be available. So again, that one's a little bit of a smaller section. Privacy is probably the second biggest to common criteria, and then availability, processing integrity, and confidentiality are on the much smaller side. So when you start talking about the lift, the work required to get through something like this, again, common criteria security is the big lift. The other ones are a lot smaller. Privacy is pretty good size. The other ones are fairly small. So this is going to be tough to see, and this is an export from a security portal that we have here at Compass, and I don't know if I can't make it any bigger. So in this version, so I'll kind of speak to this if you can see it. So when we start talking about the operating effectiveness, and again, you can probably hear I've got more kids coming home, so I hear a dog barking and other kids. So I apologize for any noise that you might hear. Timing couldn't have been worse. So we look at the operating effectiveness of these controls. So you look at these different items that we have here, and everything, if you look all the way to the far right, everything has a control period. So if you're thinking about a good way to track your SOC progress, using something like this, something where you have a specific control period, a cadence, how often it happens. Is it a weekly? Is it a monthly? Is it a quarterly? Is it completed annually? And really the key here is, as you're going through all these lists of items, and this is a dynamic list. This is something that's going to be different for every organization, for what your controls are, what you're attesting to, and what needs to operate throughout the course of a given year. The worst thing that happens is you come through your observation period and you find out you didn't do X, or you didn't do Y, or you didn't do Z. That's a punch in the stomach. That's that horrible feeling that keeps you up at night. Something like this allows you, and this is the way we when we manage organizations, we use we have a portal and a tool that we use to stay assign responsibilities, to assign due dates, have a metric that it needs to meet, and store that information into a certain area, so that when we go to gather evidence, the audit becomes fairly easy. And again, the key here is in making sure that we hit everything. And again, when you look at everything that's green here, these things all get done on time. These things are on time, will meet the control objective, will allow us to have a clean audit when that time comes. As you get into the yellows, we may be overdue. So, usually when we set these things up, we have a due date that is 2 weeks to 30 days before it was done the year before, so that we can stay in compliance. So when you see incident response plan is actually May 9th here, that should not have expired until June 9th, but we give ourselves a 30-day buffer to make sure we get that done. Because again, the last thing you need is that you didn't update it until June 10th, and now technically you're not in compliance with your control, with the control that you wrote or with your policy. So again, using something like this, where you've got all your tasks, all your categories, everything into one place where you have it assigned, and you get calendar reminders, again, has really proven to be something that ensures your operating effectiveness is not impacted when you go to that type 2. Remember, your type 1, your design, you just got to do it once. You got to show that you've done it within the last year. You got to show that you've done it once, that it's designed properly, the controls written properly, and you can continue to move forward from that standpoint. As you get into that type 2, what I consider the true audit, and again, that goes for, if you're talking about the ISO 27002, ISO 27001, again, is that design of your controls. I call it a policy and procedure drill. The 27002 is more on the operating side. Do these controls operate? You say you have a procedure for this. The procedure looks great. Are you actually doing it? Show us the metric. Show us the evidence that says you're doing this. Show us that it got done quarterly, like your policy states, or like the control states. Again, measuring that operating effectiveness is going to be really the key to your success as you go forward with this. And again, remember, it doesn't just speak to a lot of this, as you can see. I know it's going to be small on your screen. But a lot of this looks like it falls under IT, does fall under IT. But there are a lot of things that falls under, going to be fall under HR in the executive level. And how do you make sure that they're doing their part without annoying people, I guess. Doing those regular check-ins. So we have those regular check-ins built in, twice a year in this case, to make sure that HR is onboarding people properly. People are doing their onboarding cyber security awareness training. They are signing the code of conduct. They have access to where the policies are. They've acknowledged the policies upon hire, and then it's all getting done annually thereafter. So again, having that HR check in there ends up being really big, because you're going to see the first few sections have a lot to do with HR and the executive oversight that your organization has.
I had another question come in from the individual who posted a question earlier. Does Compass IT Compliance provide SOC 3 reports for organizations? So I can take this one, CJ. We do the preparation. You have to be a CPA to do the SOC 2, and then to get the SOC 3. But we have partners with CPAs that do those reports for anyone who is interested. We can get you connected up with folks that we trust, CPA organizations, for a SOC 2 and a SOC 3.
Yep, and keep in mind, again, using, and this is where, again, there's a lot of confusion when you hear SOC 2, Type 1, Type 2, Type 3. There's even a SOC 1, which is more of a financial audit, having financial controls. So there's different terms, and it gets confusing for a lot of people. A SOC 3 is, you cannot get a SOC 3 without doing a SOC 2. Your SOC 3 is a summary of your SOC 2. So it's just a little bit of a shorter report that is usually made publicly available. It doesn't require an NDA. It doesn't go as in depth from a report standpoint as a Type 2. But you have to go through the Type 2 to be able to get the Type 3. So I hope that makes sense. And as Nick said, what Compass does is, and we do this with what we've done with it's become more and more prevalent over the last couple of years, is companies are being asked to get a SOC 2. They're being asked by larger clients that if you don't have a SOC 2, then we have to go another direction. So their hands being forced, and they don't know where to start. They don't know where to start with what the control, how to write a control. What control do I write that has to be that would satisfy this objective? When we go back to everything that you see on a list like this, what's my list look like from as an organization? Where again goes back to where do I start with this? And that's where we've really had some success helping people. And again, and the companies have had success because they're the ones that they're getting complete organizational buy-in. We know the answers to the test. I guess we can kind of help design the test, and we can help you make sure that it operates. But again, we're not a CPA firm, so we are not able to do the audits. Hope that answers your question. So back to the horse that I've beaten excessively here with operating effectiveness. Again, being able to measure, and again, it's within any audit, right? Finding out at the end of the year that you didn't do Y. And there was actually a company that when we came on, they didn't do their disaster recovery test, and it was that kick in the stomach that the audit came, and it was too late. They hadn't done the disaster recovery test, and they weren't able to. They got an exception for that actual control. Another one with a different company. Everybody in the organization, they got an exception for this. Every single person in the organization did their security awareness training, with the exception of the CTO. The CTO, who at the time was the one that was overseeing most of it, and making sure everybody got it done, and being the one to hunt everybody down, overlooked doing it himself. And the audit firm gave them an exception for it. So he had to, you have to give a management response to that. But they got an exception for that. So it's something that if we had this check in place, where you have a third party checking to make sure all these things are being done, not hitting complete until this is actually done, and making sure that all the employees at the entire company did the training, things that anybody that you can do. But really is something that you need to make sure you're looking to make sure all those gaps are filled, and that end of the year comes and you didn't miss something.
Another question for you, CJ, and I know this is an area that our organization has been putting more focus on lately, but are there specific audits for cloud providers?
Specific audits for cloud providers. So Cloud providers, I guess I'd probably talk to somebody more on our audit side to speak to some of those audits. But if I said from a SOC 2, cloud providers are going through a SOC 2. They go through a lot of different audits, but they will go through a SOC 2 audit in this case. And if you look at anything, if you look at AWS, if you look at Azure, you look at Slack, you look at Microsoft Teams, all these different organizations that different cloud providers are all going through a SOC 2 audit, and they publicly make them available through their compliance websites. You usually have to have an account there to be able to download it. But cloud providers are going through SOC 2 audits, and again, there's of course other audits they can go through as well. CIS audits are another one that's pretty popular, probably on the cloud provider side. But SOC 2 audits are something that are being done by cloud providers and that we're looking for in a vendor review. Like I said, just this backup solution that I looked at this week is a cloud backup solution. And one had a SOC 2, one did not. And the one that had the SOC 2 is the one that we went with because we could see the design of their controls and of their environment. So it really allowed them to get more business, and they were very responsive and little things that tie back to making that part work.
Another one for you. What constitutes an exception? In the case of the new hires, when 10% of hires would be a sample of 400, if one of those failed for a background check, for example, would the control fail as a whole?
So it's not necessarily a fail, but it's that there's an exception. So the exception would be written that one of 400 sampled did not complete the new hire package. It would go into the report as an exception that way, and the organization would be given a chance. They'd be allowed to give a management response. So that management response gets documented in the report as well. So it's not a fail. Now, again, as we talk about a fail, so there's 4 different languages they use. The main 2 are a unqualified opinion, which to get more confusing is good. So unqualified opinion is a pass, controls operated effectively. And then there's a qualified position, which is basically a fail. And there's also a disclaimer, and then there's an adverse. So it keeps getting worse. So you have unqualified, good, qualified, basically a fail, disclaimer that this company has problems, and adverse, basically saying do not use this company, at all costs. So to answer your question, you would have an exception. It doesn't mean it's a fail. You can have multiple exceptions and not have a failed SOC 2 report, but it will get documented as an exception. In some cases, I've seen an exception. I came in with a company who had done SOC 2s, I think 3 or 4 years prior, and their controls were written horribly, and they weren't even aligning. They weren't even doing half of them, but the previous auditor had passed them. Came in with a new auditor. The auditor gave them exceptions for them, but it allowed us to give a management response that spoke to a little bit more in depth about what we do, what they did at that time. So again, it's not the end of the world to get an exception, but you would get an exception for 1 out of 400. Again, it's a very small percentage. If I'm reviewing that, it's not something that I even worry about. I do document it as part of the review, but would not be something that stopped me from working with a company. Hope that answered your question. So again, as you go through these, and I know a lot of this SOC 2 seems to be something that is very confusing, and I think a lot of it is just in some of the verbiage, right? Just alone, as we talked about, unqualified being good and qualified being bad. I think we've all been raised to think qualified is good, but in this case, unqualified is good. Qualified is not so good. When you start thinking about SOC 1, and then SOC 2 type 1, SOC 2 type 2, and then we bring up the SOC 3, which is a summary of the SOC 2. It can be very confusing, and I, again, totally understand that. And we've had to explain this to many people, to many companies, in numerous times. It's just confusing. But once you get it, it is quite easy and quite easy to understand. To go through a SOC 2 audit, it really can be easy. And I think if you go back a couple slides to where we organize what we need to do, but prioritizing security. anytime you talk to me, what you'll hear from me is if you prioritize security, if you do all the things that are on that list, on that for us in our management portal, if we're doing all those different things, then number one, you're going to be secure. You're going to have a strong security posture. You're going to have a strong security culture. But by doing that, you're prioritizing security, and your audit's going to be easy. The audit writes itself when you prioritize security and you do all those functions. If you haven't missed a thing, if everything on your to-do list is green and assigned and being accomplished, the audit's easy, and you're going to be much more secure. The designing of your controls, like we talked about earlier, don't skip right to a type 2. Do the type 1. Put the emphasis on that design. Make sure you design your controls properly. Make sure the design is tested. It's an open book test. Design it properly, and then go worry about them operating. Design them to be repeatable. And then from there, you will mature your program to be defined and managed as that cybersecurity model dictates. The whole organization buys in. Again, top down. HR is doing their thing. You don't have to worry about them, right? Every time you do your quarterly check-ins or your annual check-ins, they're doing their piece. All the new hires are going through a certain process. People who are terminated or offboarded in a timely manner, there's a ticket submitted for the person. Access is disabled as fast as possible. Again, the entire organization buys in. The audit becomes easy. As we talked about numerous times, tracking the operating controls, the operation of the controls, make sure everything is being done. Again, you do these things, the audit really is easy, and your organization is much more secure. So as we wrap up, again, I always like to go with my Homer Simpson as we end. Can be confusing, right? And I know it's just even some of the questions I get it, and I'm talking with people who may not be doing this for a living. I get that it can be confusing. Again, whether you work with us here at Compass or not, you're welcome to reach out and happy to give you an explanation, for whatever helps you. Again, anytime you have a question like that, you have our contact information. There's contact us forms on our website. Ask the question. We're happy to try to give you a little bit more of an explanation. We've beat this horse, but I'll beat it again. The design of your controls is important. If you don't design them properly, then they can't operate properly. And as important as those control designs are, making sure that it operates is much more important. But if you don't design it properly, you can never get to the operation side. And again, I truly feel that when you do these things, when you design your controls properly, you get the entire organization to buy in. That's a culture change, right? And again, we, all of us here, work in security in some way, and an organization that buys into the security culture and an organization that doesn't. And I really think when you see the ones that don't, it's just it scares me. I think it's a matter of time before something bad happens. And again, going through something like a SOC 2 audit, having your controls written the way they are, again, showcase what you're doing, the controls you have in place, again, really, really can be huge. So again, appreciate everyone's time. Nick, I don't know if there's any more questions that have come in, but I apologize for the couple interruptions. But again, glad to have a chance to talk to you guys about SOC 2.
A question for you, CJ, is how much emphasis do you put on service commitments and system requirements during scoping?
How much emphasis on system requirements and service commitments? Again, I would say not a ton. Again, I think what we want to capture there, from my standpoint, is what you're doing. Highlight what you're doing. I use terminology like play big. You're really showcasing what you're doing from that service commitment, because this is your chance for somebody who's maybe having to look at you from again, I'll use myself as an example. So if I'm reviewing someone's SOC report and I'm looking at their service commitments, I have a touch point of a lot of different companies. So I could say, hey, I really like what these guys do, like how they explain their service offering, what their service commitments are, something that can really help showcase. From a SOC audit, it's gonna help us design, because if you're saying you do one of your service commitments is 99.99% uptime. Well, we got to make sure we're doing availability. We got to make sure that we have a hot site, a disaster recovery site, business continuity plans in place and has been tested. So, there are places that will highlight our controls. So I guess I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth as I think here, but I guess one thing I would use it for is to showcase your organization, but another one would certainly scope us for what trust services we need to be doing, with the obviously we're doing security, but with privacy, availability, confidentiality, and processing integrity. So yeah, that service commitment would certainly help us scope that part of it.